Good evening. Welcome to this very special afternoon and into the evening where we are going to be in conversation with a very special Busi Mavuso, CEO, Executive Director of BUSA, Business Unity South Africa. That's her happy day, happy job, happy place, and doing some really important work in many different spaces, not least of which is ESCOM, where she is non-executive director. Didn't see that one coming.
You just had to go there, hey? Yeah, didn't see that one coming, definitely.
But we won't start there, we'll start somewhere else.
Yes.
I know that you're a deeply private person.
Yes.
So I'm not going to ask you to tell us anything you don't want to tell us.
Yes,
but
please.
It is our tradition here just to get to know the person behind the title.
Yeah.
Did you always know that you would find yourself in a leadership position?
No.
So if you think back to young girl Busi, did you always know that you'd find yourself in this prominent leadership position?
Yeah, very interesting. No, far from it actually, Morris. So I come from very humble beginnings, born and bred in Soweto. Couldn't even go to university full time because we didn't have the financial means for me to be able to do so. So I think a big part of my life coming out of school, getting a job, was really about survival. It was about sustenance. It was about ensuring that I helped my widowed mom, who was widowed when I was 8, and there's 4 of us. Was the first one to get a job in the family, of course, supporting my mom. So I carried a whole lot of that responsibility, and all of this, I think the fortitude to move ahead, to continue to study, to make something of myself was really in an effort to try and lift myself and my family out of poverty, and I think that is all that it was, Some people call me an activist. I'm not,
But they're not wrong.
Far from it.
From BMF. So that was a proper activist role. BUSA, proper activist role. So why do you not lean into the activism?
Yes. Look, I probably maybe we need to define what activism is, right? And I think it just so happened that I found myself in positions where both these organizations are advocacy and lobby organizations, which therefore means you can't advocate quietly. You can't be diplomatic when you're advocating. You need to tell it as it is. You need to push certain policy positions. You need to ensure that the positioning that you're taking as an organization, as a constituency, is very clear, and probably maybe the passion with which I do it is what maybe, gets me termed as an activist. But no, far from it, I would have never dreamed, to end up here. And I think the prominence of these positions and of this particular position in particular is one that is a bit tricky for me, because honestly, believe it or not, I'm very antisocial. I prefer my own company. I love my own space. I'm a hermit.
So are you saying 2020 was your happy year in the sense that you could work from home?
Absolutely. I was one of those people who absolutely loved that, But I guess I understand. I've got a very good way of separating Busi the person and Busi the CEO of BLSA, and I guess from a BLSA perspective,
oh my goodness, I said BUSA. Why did I say
I'm
that?
a non-executive director of
BUSA,
so it's okay.
But I got it wrong.
I'm a board member of BUSA. It's okay. Kes won't be offended. It's fine.
Yo, okay, so amazu keswe. So talking about still the person, who did you look up to as a young girl?
As cliche as it sounds, Morris, it was really my mom. I was raised by a very independent and strong woman who taught us to be just as strong and independent, who really fought very hard to give us some semblance of normalcy of a life, in White City. I don't know how much you know Soweto. But if you know White City Jabavu, it's one of those townships where, you very difficult environment, where you actually, if you want to bring your kids in a safe, cultured, protected environment, that environment just blows that out of the water. So you have to be very strong as a parent, to actually ensure that your kids toe the line, as it were. And unfortunately, she could only take all of us, all my 3 siblings included, to matric. She couldn't take us any further in terms of studies, but she always preached the value and the importance of education, because then she would say, when I pass away someday, I'm not going to have any inheritance to bequeath to you, so the only inheritance that you can actually make for yourself is actually make sure that as soon as you get jobs, make sure that you study and have an education behind you. So I continue to be passionate about education from that perspective. But maybe as well, Maurice, I saw how it actually is a game changer, in terms of changing, as I've said, the social class of a person from one, a social class to the other. And I think when it comes to education, this is one of the issues that really frustrate me about South Africa. The fact that we still continue to give these kids, as much as we spend so much money on education, the poor quality of education that we give these kids. For me, it's worrying, Maurice, because it says we are not breaking the chain. It says that these kids who mainly come from underprivileged, backgrounds, who are not your and my kids who go to these Model C schools, are actually going to grow up stuck in this chain of poverty and in this environment of poverty, because you're not giving them the one thing that can actually make a difference. If you agree that we are an open economy, we play in the global stages as South Africa, it therefore means we're not only competing with ourselves, but we're competing with the rest of the world. So it therefore means that the stock that we produce from a labor perspective, has to be stock that can compete at that level. So if you've got grade 4 learners who can't read for meaning, and they're expected to be competing with grade 4 learners from the Asian tigers, who are already being taught programming and coding, and you can see that these kids have lost the race before they've even begun running, So I think education for me is important from that perspective, because I know that it honestly, I think it was Nelson Mandela who said it is only through education that a daughter of a son of a farm worker and a son of a domestic worker can become a president. And I agree with him, because it is a game changer in a serious way.
So as South Africans, we are very good at problematizing our situation, and we can all agree that a lot is broken. And I want us to stay there, but only for a little bit of time.
Yes.
And then, because the bulk of the conversation that I would like us to have is what is working, and how do we amplify that
which is working, so that as we kind of use that as case study about how we can fix the things that are not working as we focus into the future. So let's stay a little bit as to, if you were to identify the 2 or 3 critical things that worry you about that which is broken in South Africa, what would that be? So I think top 3 things that if I could change tomorrow, I would change is, number 1, the endemic, systemic, deep, wide, high levels of corruption. I really think that it undermines whatever it is that we're trying to do as a country. And I think secondly, I would change the incapable state, or I would make the state capable, because I really think that there is a serious own goal that we score on that front. And I think I would make the environment conducive for investment, because we all agree that for us to be able to reach the required levels of economic growth, you need to make the environment conducive. South Africa is losing its position as the gateway to the African continent precisely because of overregulation and of our environment not being conducive for investment. And we know that to arrest the 44% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, where you have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape, it is through growing the economy at the right levels, not social grants, growing the economy at the right levels. So I think our demographic growth has been, I think, about 1.6% or whatever the case is, and our real growth as a country since 2013 has not touched, or has barely touched 1%. It's a serious problem. So economic growth needs to be where we put our efforts.
So maybe to digress a little bit, when you're talking about creating a conducive environment, and this is a business school after all.
Yes,
we are pro-business.
Yes,
we like leaders in business.
Yes.
But from time to time, we're criticized for having self-interest.
Yes.
So, for example, the latest comment around we need to be a little bit more measured about how we think about carbon tax, for example.
Yes.
That came out of BLSA. how can we position those things in a way that society understands this is in all of our interest, versus what it looks now as if it's a self-interest of the few?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, in advocating for everything that we advocate for as business, Maurice, we are not saying government must enact and put in place policies that we like or policies that will suit us. We want policies that will move the country forward, even if it means that they are, for some reason, you know, at a detriment to business. The main issue around policies, policy certainty and policy clarity. Now take the visa issue, for instance. You know, our visa regime, work visa issue, you know, that system has been very poor, very problematic. But I think by the decision that we made in January to actually centrally adjudicate the work visas, meaning all the applications that come from all over the world are sent to Pretoria, where only 2 people are processing them. You know, and these 2 people are not in the office all the time. When they are not in the office, they don't have the systems or the laptops or whatever the case is to continue to work at home. So you sit in an environment where for the past 9 months, you know, a lot of experts, of people who need to come into the country, of investors, of whatever international community interests that need to be in the country, could not come into the country, and this thing has been a serious problem. You know, I spoke to the CEO of Nestle the other day, saying that I've been stuck outside of South Africa for almost 6 months. My son actually was supposed to start school about 3 weeks ago, and we don't have feedback from government. So those are the issues, right? So we don't even understand from where we're sitting why that decision of central adjudication was made. But it's fine, say you make the decision, but ensure that at least from an operations perspective, you've got the systems, the process, and the people in place, you know, that will ensure that the decision that is... So you can't sleep with one set of policies and wake up, things have completely changed. You know, so stability and transparency is what makes economies work. It is what makes business invest. And I think we are struggling from a stability and transparency perspective.
So at the risk of amplifying one country and alienating others, for me, when I think about business-friendly countries, amongst them, at the top is a small country called Ireland.
Wow.
All right?
Yeah.
That seems to have a deep understanding of what it is to keep the country moving. Okay. So if, like in Joburg, you'll see no jobs, if you're like looking for employment. Yeah. When you go to Dublin, for example, it's help wanted.
Wow.
So it's the inverse, right?
Yes.
And so we have currently colleagues from Austria, about MBA students with their dean, and she says how they need to manage is they must understand that we don't have enough talent in country, so we have to look after the little bit of talent that we have. Wow. So they also have an over-employment situation where they don't have enough people for the amount of jobs that they have. Wow. What can we learn from those countries so that we could also become a destination of choice where we have a situation where we're not fighting for government to make it friendly for business, but we're working with government to attract foreign investment, to attract companies to operate in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I like that, because when all is said and done, if business and government in particular, labor and civil society, of course, don't work together, then there are no winners. Yeah. You know, so I think it is important that we definitely do that. So I think coherence is probably maybe one of the issues that still trip us up, Maurice, from a South African perspective, because when you're looking at the skills that the economy requires and what our education system is giving us, you know, there is a disconnect. You know, we're producing a lot of skills that business doesn't currently want. So it doesn't look like there is long-term planning, you know, which says what's coming around the corner. But besides what's coming around the corner, because I believe that that's being responsive, what do we want to be known for? Where do we want to excel as a country? If we want to be a hub and a center of excellence of something, what is that? And we'll probably maybe define that, and we put all the time, energy, and effort that we have and resources as a country to actually ensure that we build towards that. So I don't think that is, so I think there is always that disconnect from that perspective, where when you get some of these kids out of matric coming into the into the university system, they normally have to do some kind of bridging course, because the universities will say that these kids are not ready or they are not coping, at the level at which we want them to cope at. And when they are in the system, the reason why you have a lot of dropouts, it's precisely because of that. But I think this issue of the schooling system, public schooling system, not producing the skills that business needs is precisely a problem. So I think probably maybe to get to where Ireland is, I think if we were to do one thing, maybe that alignment and that coherence would be helpful.
But you are already in leadership. You are at the top. Business leadership South Africa, Busa, ESCOM. Why do we point fingers at others? Why can't we solve these problems?
Yeah. And there is a lot that business is doing in terms of growing its own timber, but obviously that is actually going to take time. We are saying that it's not an either or, it's a together, at the same time. It would be foolish of us to not leverage the existing public schooling system, which produces thousands, if not millions, of graduates every year, to already channel those kids, towards a particular direction. Because once you, number one, they struggle to get into corporate South Africa because maybe they don't have the necessary skills. If they do get into corporate South Africa, then there is this lag period where you actually have to get them ready. So if that means, and I think there's also something to be said, Maurice, and definitely I think this is something that business should be doing. When we bring these experts, when we import these skills, I don't think that there is an intentional program around the skills transfer, to say that how do we ensure that when these experts leave the country after 5 years or after 10 years, these skills, remain with us so that we don't have to continue to do this all over again. So I absolutely take the blame. I think we're having a conversations around the CETAs as well, to say that for the skills development funds that we're paying as business, the CETAs, the programs that are accredited by the CETAs are not ones that are actually responding to what business needs. So you can see that we are failing at communication. I agree.
So I mean, before I go to the questions online, I would be remiss if we don't touch on something that is affecting all of us right now in the country. And hopefully it won't affect us during this session, so I don't know what our load shedding schedule is at the moment. But at a business level, our inability to address our energy crisis in this country is a real problem. If you look through this cycle, when can we start getting some level of consistency, some level of certainty of energy supply? And I'm looking beyond ESCOM, I'm looking at the broader energy supply mechanism. When as business can we start expecting some logical actions to be taking place and we can have some normalcy in an operating environment? And obviously here, you're not speaking as an ESCOM representative, I'm speaking to somebody who's a little bit of an insider, but also representing the voice of business.
Maurice, the honest answer is we don't know. I don't know, both as a CEO of Business Leadership South Africa and as an ESCOM director. No, I'm not speaking in that capacity, but I don't know. And the reason why I'm saying I don't know, yes, we have now produced this electricity crisis plan that has been adopted by the country, and I think a lot of it is private sector participation, which is brilliant. We've been calling for this private sector participation, not just in energy, in a whole lot of spaces and in a whole lot of industries, ports and rail and a whole lot of other fronts, network industries in particular, for quite some time, because we know that through the state capture project, its intention was to weaken and hollow out the state's institutions, and it was very successful in that regard. So private sector participation therefore becomes necessary. So the plan that has been produced, except for the one intervention of fixed ESCOM, everything else, really talks to how the private sector can come in. But if you look at where bid Windows 5, for instance, at the moment, because when you're looking at the IPP program, it's bid Windows 5 that is supposed to be closing and bid Windows 6 that is supposed to be announced soon. Bid Windows 5 is actually delaying. It's delaying because of issues, regulatory issues, issues within IPP office, within DMRE, these service providers are telling you that they are probably not going to be able to reach financial close, because so many elements have shifted since the bid windows was first commissioned. And I think that is just talking to the amount of time that it takes us to actually start something and finish it. When you adjudicate these things, until closure, if you don't move quickly enough, a lot of elements move which make it impossible. Costs have gone up. Russia war happened. We have been hit with a whole lot of these externalities, as an industry. And they are saying that unless certain adjustments and amendments are actually made, we won't be able to close. I know that there's conversations with the IPP office and no one is actually listening. And they are saying if we can't close bid Windows 5, it means bid Windows 6
but is anyone drawing, as the much vilified Pravin Gordon used to say, is anyone joining the dots, i.e., if we don't fix these things, for example, one industry, the automotive industry, disappears by 2030.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we know it's
exactly.
a big contributor to foreign investments.
Yeah.
It's a big employer in cities that can't afford not to have the automotive. Does no one not join the dots that fix that energy sector, you fix these industries? Mining is an issue, etc., etc. I mean, is no one joining the dots for these policymakers and decision makers?
We are having that conversation. So the issue of has been brought to my attention as business for me to actually see how I can actually intervene and how I can actually highlight the problem so that we have a move ahead. But I'm thinking that the president said NECOM is actually going to be responsible for actually implementing this thing. I don't know to what extent NECOM is engaging with the issue. I don't know if NECOM has started having these conversations. I don't know if it has been properly set up yet. I know that we have received a request from NECOM for capacitation as business, and we are facilitating that in terms of giving them people, but I'm not sure if they are having that conversation to say that if we don't make these amendments, then bid window 5 is at risk, which means bid window 6 is actually not going to come through, which means that the whole plan that we've actually given to the country is actually at risk. We've told the country that we've got a plan to fix load shedding. If these things are not implemented, it means that we are not going to be able to deliver that. And I think if you look at another aspect of that plan, Maurice, which is the embedded generation, we have now lifted the license exemption for self-generation from 100 megawatts to unlimited, but when you go to NESA today to try and register an embedded project or a self-generation project of more than 100 megawatts, NESA will tell you that you can't, because the regulatory environment has not been amended, to cater for registering a self-generation project which is above 100 megawatts. And the announcement was already made, I don't know, was it 3 weeks ago, whatever the case is. So I think, and I'm hoping that...
So maybe they should release the lawyers from fighting the other Busi to come and help fix this other problem that this Busi is involved with, because clearly there are too many lawyers fighting the president and that other Busi. So maybe we can shift the conversation. And I won't honor them in the order they came. I'll honor them in the logic that fits into this conversation. So one of our friends of GIBS is Warren Lafleur, says, would love your thoughts on the role of venture capital and other alpha asset classes in creating an innovation-led economy that improves competitiveness and enables a more sustained recovery. Warren, this is a general conversation, not for asset managers. Basically, how alternative asset classes can drive innovation. I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah. So I know, for instance, and we don't have enough of those. I don't think there are enough targeted efforts. And I think the question that Warren is asking goes to what I was touching on earlier on, Maurice, to say that we probably maybe need to define what we want to known for as an economy, or where we want to our expertise to lie, or where we actually want to excel at, and let's actually put all our efforts towards that, So I don't think innovation is top of the list, even though we know, that is where the world is going, even though we know that we're actually going to have to ensure that we excel on that, but we are really not there yet. You've got people like Adrian Gore, for instance, who I know is busy with an initiative, and I'm trying to think Silicon Valley, Cape Valley, or Cape Silicon, something like that. He's coming with a Cape, which is going to be based in Stellenbosch, and is actually partnering with the UCT, and I don't know which other university in the Western Cape, and I know he's thinking about Wits University as well. So there is that initiative, that Adrian Gore is actually canvassing other business leaders to actually help him and support him, in this venture, as it were. So there are pockets within the system who are thinking of that, but not nearly enough.
So then Warren can tap into those. Yeah. And Malekutu Edwin Mpaki is really interested in us not relying on old industries too much, like mining, although Malekutu, we are very happy for mining dividends at the moment, so please don't knock them. He says, are there any other plans that that government has, is talking about what should we be known for? Which other industries is government looking to drive so that we can create a growth trajectory that you know of?
Yeah. Look, the energy industry in particular, and I think with the path that government has taken of bringing in the private sector, I think it is actually going to unlock a whole lot of private sector capital. So we are going to see, as much as some elements of government are worried about the coal industry, but the investment that we're going to see in this, and I'm not going to call it an IRP because it's not an IRP, but in this new way, we have a lot of elements now of energy supply, energy generation, and I think we seem to be embracing that as a new way forward, as it were. So those industries are actually going to unlock a lot of opportunities, and I think now that we have started, even though this was born out of a crisis, but I think that it's something that we should embrace. There is no reason why South Africa should not be leveraging your solar when we've got 365 days a year. You've got Germany, who only has 180 days of the sun a year, but they are doing brilliantly from a solar perspective.
Can't we ask our battery king Elon Musk to bring his technology here so we can learn to harness the sun, and through the process maybe we can pick up the rand, like the other minister used to say. Surely these are some of the things we should be focusing, manufacturing of these kinds of energy supply issues.
Absolutely. And I think when you speak to the automobile industry, they'll tell you that they are moving towards the EV space, but again, that will be dependent, and that will only be succeed if we've got a stable energy supply. So and I think those are all issues that are but as much as we, and this is the dichotomy of South Africa, I don't think we can ignore the fact that we are still two economies. Maurice, we still have the majority of the citizens of this country who are either unskilled or semi-skilled. So I think those traditional industries, still serve a purpose from absorbing the majority of the citizens of this country. But I guess it's really looking at how we move forward with the two without completely abandoning the other, because I worry that when we completely abandon the other, we are going to leave a whole lot of people out from participating in the economic mainstream, which is also not good, for the economy, which is why we are actually sitting in this high domestic inequality, which leads to social instability crisis.
So when you spoke earlier about bid window 5, you mentioned that capital was something to worry about, because these investors are worried about at what price point. So Funisile Debra Kanyile, I think she's put in Debra, for those that don't know, her name is Funisile. She says, how can the government encourage savings and investment and in turn improve the economic climate, which will also then contribute to people being able to fund these alternative energy projects and so forth?
I think saving is something that would come naturally when you reach when you already have satisfied certain needs on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So while you still have the majority, our social structure is more than 50% of our people are living in poverty. It becomes difficult to talk about savings when people are dependent on 350 social grants. We've got 18 million of our people, who are dependent on some form of social grant or the other. And I think I was having this conversation with someone the other day and saying, no, social structure is no longer 10 plus 30 plus 50. It's now 2080. So we've got a missing, the middle class is sort of like missing, 20% opulent and more than. And I think that is even a more worrying picture. If so many of our people are sitting in that bottom. So it's probably maybe trying to solve for what is most urgent, what is most needed, right now, and I'm not saying that savings is not, but I'm just saying that having so many people not participating in the economic mainstream has problems of its own. Having so many people not having a claim in the economy or stake in the economy has problems of its own. It means that the July anarchy, still remains a reality. If you speak to some people, they will tell you, and I believe that this is true actually, they will tell you that the elements of the Arab Spring are imminent and present in South Africa today. So the interventions for me that we put in place need to be solving for that. And I believe that the private sector participation, like the government has done in the energy space, is a step towards that direction, because you're opening up industries that didn't exist before, and these new industries are going to need people, and I don't think that, it's probably maybe a lot of manpower. We're talking about infrastructure investment, cranes going up, we are in a position to absorb this 80% or this plus 50%. And I really think that our energy and efforts and interventions should be targeted towards that.
But realistically, if we don't have enough savings, which means we can't invest, because if we don't have the money, you don't have an ability to invest. And if you're not investing, you're not able to grow the economy. And if you're not able to grow the economy, you're not able to create those opportunities so we do need, something else needs to give. And yet we're seeing an acceleration of our expenditure budget, and yet our revenue budget is creaking.
Yeah.
If you could choose something to stop doing to create space for the future, remember, we have to invest in our future. If we could create something to stop doing so we can save on that thing that we're stopping, and so that we can invest on those areas like education, which you are so passionate about, that can give us that leverage into the future. What is it that we could stop doing as a country?
So, and Maurice, I'm not underplaying the importance of domestic savings, but let's agree that that is a long-term project, as it were. We have an opportunity right now. A lot of these first world countries are looking at Africa as an investment destination. The interest in Africa is in the, is it 1.3 billion people or 1.4 billion people? The youngest population, in the world. There's a lot of opportunities, that they are seeing in Africa. I'm saying that is the low-hanging fruit that we can actually position ourselves for, while we actually try and build our domestic savings, which is actually going to take us some time to actually get there. If you're just looking at the income statement of South Africa Inc., and look at how much we're spending, for instance, on servicing our debt, because before we can even talk about saving, we need to reduce that debt. Is it 74% debt to GDP ratio? That is quite high for a country like South Africa, so we therefore need to ensure that we service that first before we actually meaningfully, make a serious intervention or an impact from a savings perspective. So the one thing that I think we should probably maybe stop to get us moving, or to create some space in our fiscus. When we had this conversation with the president as business, when he was actually presenting the electricity crisis plan, and he wanted to hear the views of business. And when I saw the line item fix Eskom, my question was, what does that mean? Because if it means pouring more money into Eskom so that you fix it, Eskom in its current environment continues to be the ground zero for siphoning funds out of the state. Eskom continues to be a crime scene. Whatever you put into these institutions, state-owned entities, broadly, all of those that were actually hollowed out by the state capture still have a lot of remnants, of state capture elements within them. It therefore means whatever money you pour in there, only a fraction of it goes towards its intended purpose. So I think if we can actually, and I'm not sure what this looks like, Maurice, is it beefing up our criminal justice system, so that we send a strong and tough message, that there's going to be zero tolerance, to corruption? Is it maybe starting at the top and making sure that those that are implicated in both business and government, by the way, those that are implicated in corruption, are actually decisively dealt with, so that you actually disincentivize, corruption? I worry about it because it seems as if born of the state capture project or born from the state capture project, there's this prevalence of extortion, of mafia, of syndicates, of whether it's the diesel syndicate or coal syndicates or construction mafia, whatever the case. So we are losing a lot of we are bleeding as a pouring money in the South African system. It's like pouring money in a leaking bucket.
So here's a question.
So I really think that,
I know we're business, we don't want to be taxed. Yeah. But we are being taxed, and now taxed, as you say, end up being a source of crime money, so to speak. If we could persuade government to tax us for one thing, have an NPA tax, a once off to tax business and say, this money that we're gonna take 0.5%, 0.1%, whatever it is, and that money once off, it's a windfall tax, we're gonna give it to Shamila Batohi and say, go after all of them. Would business be open to that?
Business would be open to that, but not in this current system. No business will put money into government as things
I'm not saying to government, saying you're giving directly to the justice system, directly to
absolutely
fight. So it's not going to go to Treasury. Treasury is going to decide how much of it goes to social grants, how much of it goes to health, how much of it goes to the police. But this one goes directly to the Directorate of Special Prosecution, and they say, go for it. Do you think business could go behind something like that?
The business would definitely go behind something like that. We are already doing it, actually, Maurice. I signed an MOU with the NPA, and that is where that was my interaction before this one with the NPA, I think about 3 weeks ago, where since Shamila Batohi came into office since 2019, we've been having a conversation with her, looking at how we can actually capacitate the NPK, because we know the important work that the NPA has to do in order, number one, we needed to do that to avoid the grey listing, and it doesn't look like we're going to be successful in doing that, but also to just restore confidence in the system, just to make sure that people don't continue to walk around with the impunity that they're doing. So the MOU that we have signed is not giving money to the system. That was something that was actually discussed, but there was discomfort, from business, because it doesn't go to the NPA, it goes to National Treasury, but then the expediency, therefore, is blown out of the window from that perspective, because it goes to National Treasury, it has to go through whatever processes, and it's going to be allocated through the budget whenever, and Shamila Batohi needs the resources now, because I think the ball is moving, as we can see some of the arrests that they've actually made. So we are giving her resources, that was the middle compromise or safe compromise that we actually came to. She doesn't want money from business, we understand that, so we are giving her resources, data analysts, forensic analysts, forensic accountants. She's saying that I have been hollowed out as the NP. I've got the best prosecutors in the country, but I've been hollowed out in terms of the support structure that will ensure that the dockets that are given, or the files that are given to my prosecutors, are files that are strong enough so that when they take these things to court, they can be able to succeed. She says, I struggle with commercial crimes where I have to follow the money. Because those require a certain level of sophistication that doesn't exist in the NPA. It was there before, but due to the state capture project, all those resources and those skills are now sitting in the private sector. So private sector, can you assist with giving me those skills? And we are busy with that at the moment. So business is supporting the NPA from a resource perspective.
Lovely. So I've got a question on whistleblowing. in the sense that for many of us who are not inside the tent, so to speak, whistleblowers have been amazing. They've done amazing work. But we also know that the whistleblowers are also complicit in many cases, because, not in many, in some cases, let me rather say, because they would have been at some point being insiders and now they've had a fallout and now they do whistleblowing. When we look at the whistleblowing laws, it doesn't seem like there's a place or much protection for those whistleblowers who were also complicit. And as a result, it looks like it doesn't really pay to be that kind of a whistleblower.
Yeah.
Is there a space for business to kind of reflect and say, all whistleblowers are welcome, because their battle is so much bigger than trying to punish you for your little indiscretion, because you've just exposed an even bigger problem. Are conversations of that kind happening for us to create a whistleblowing regime which actually works for society, as opposed to is used against people that come thinking at some point they're acting in the best interest of society?
So the discussions we're having at the moment, I think, are to try and solve the short-term and temporary or maybe current problems that whistleblowers are facing. But I think, to your point, we are yet to have conversations which are probably maybe going to institutionalize, how we deal with this thing going forward, so that it's not random. I know the president has set up, is it a anti-corruption task team or whatever the case is?
Yes.
I'm not sure what the mandate of that is. I wonder if some of it is going to be looking at how we best support whistleblowers going forward. But the conversation we are having from a BUSA perspective is this institution that has actually been set up to actually assist whistleblowers, because, to your point, once they come out, then they are really out on their own. They lose their ability to make a living. They lose their homes. They can't take their kids to school. Some of them have to flee the country. Their lives are at stake. So we are looking at how we actually support them from a financial perspective. But as I'm saying, that we need to go beyond that, because I think that just serves the current, and I don't think that we are going to be supporting them perpetually. That's not what they want. They want to be to come back into the system and continue to participate as active economic participants, as it were. So we're not really having those conversations. Maybe the anti-corruption task team is, Maurice, which I'm not aware of.
So earlier, Samuel Makabo raised an issue of starting with me, says him, it starts with communities and instilling these principles of Ubuntu and ethical leadership. And how do we begin to do this with our current crop of leaders, both in business and in government, where it looks like it doesn't matter whether it's in business? You look at what's happening in Tongaat, what's happening at Steinhoff, what has happened rather in Steinhoff and other places, examples of malfeasance in business. And then, of course, we've got all the volumes of malfeasance involving business and government in Zondo. How do we re-instill ethical leadership in this country, underpinned by this beautiful concept of Ubuntu?
Yeah. I think the problem that we have from an ethics perspective is a bigger one than we probably maybe realize, Maurice, because from my own analysis, I think that we need to address the degeneration of the moral and ethical fiber. I really think that is what is fundamentally broken. Here it's just a serious moral fiber degeneration. And I look at it and I say that all of us come from family units. So if we get to these institutions and be corrupt, I wonder, does it start here as a CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, or is something broken from a family unit perspective? Because this thing is not a business issue, it's not a government issue, it's a South African-wide problem. Was talking earlier on about the extortion mafias, that also are ethical or rather unethical practices that we actually need to clamp down on. So it's broken at the bottom, but I think it's also broken at the top. The tone from the top is not one that actually shows a no tolerance, to corruption, as it were, and when they say the fish rots from the top, that is actually true. So I think if we are not going to clamp down hard on corruption, if we are not so you therefore you become this society which is corruptible, because you are seeing others who are actually benefiting and are being successful from corruption, people who walk around with the greatest of impunity, from corrupt, activities. Political figures who think that they can run for office after having been found to be involved in corruption. So all of that is not helping, So I really think that
but what can we do about it?
It's broken from the family unit. That is my view. The moral fiber of our society.
So we need to go back to Sunday school.
Because go back to Sunday school. Let's have different conversations with our kids. Yeah. Because honestly, if it's not fixed there, because before we are, when you speak about business is a legal entity. And a business would be corrupt if me as a CEO and my executives or whoever else is corrupt. So I'm an individual who lives in this moral or rather immoral, unethical, corrupt system. And I'm somehow going to be tainted by it. And because there is so much prevalence of corruption in this environment that I live in on my day-to-day, it becomes second nature and normal for me to go at BLSA and do it. So I think trying to fix it there is probably too late. There's probably going to have to be some societal, family, back to basics reset button that we need to hit, as a country, to say where did we go wrong from a moral fiber and moral degeneration perspective.
Sure, I agree with that, and that's long term.
Yep.
But the stuff we can do today,
yep.
In terms of how we show up in a crisis, how we show up when our ethics are called upon. So what's happened over the weekend in Jagersfontein, for example, is an opportunity for business and government to show up. Yes, of course, government dropped the ball. And of course, we know the owners dropped the ball. But what can we do, all of us as business and government and society, to kind of show up in an ethical way as opposed to worrying about the legal liability risk? I mean, for example, I think it was brave when you said that ESCOM is a crime scene. As a director of ESCOM, that is a brave thing to say, right? But we need more people to be doing that, to say, you know what, yes, I might not be legally liable as I know today, but I feel responsible. I feel accountable, and as a mining industry, what are we doing to hold each other accountable, let alone what the Department of Mineral Resources is doing, but what are we doing to hold each other accountable?
Yeah.
So for me, it's kind of that ethical leadership really starts with me and you. It doesn't start with those people out there. And so what can we do today as organizations?
So I think coming down hard on corruption, as I've said, Maurice, is actually going to be the one thing that we do in the immediate, because the moral degeneration, to a point, is going to take a long time. So I think when the state capture project in 2016, became known, BLSA, and I don't know if and I think other organizations as well, but we publicly came out and started suspending, some of our members who were actually involved in the state capture project. I think that was a sign or an attempt for us to actually take that no-nonsense approach, towards corruption. We made our members to sign integrity pledges, to say that I'm going to conduct my business in an ethical manner. Otherwise, you can't sit around the table with us, and call yourself a business leader. We're also having conversations within business to say that how do we actually strengthen our control environments? Because if you sit as a CEO employing 32,000 people or 11,000 people or other cases, there is no way that you're going to be able to vouch for their moral, campus, all of them. So you therefore need to put systems in place. Let's tighten our control environments, so that we can ensure that it's not an environment that lends itself to corruption. Where corruption is found, let's take a no-nonsense approach. Let's fire those executives. Let's open, criminal cases, against them, and hopefully the law takes its course. Where probably maybe, as we have seen, you have one executive who sits with a lot of power in terms of, bringing clients in. Let's see what guardrails we put in place to ensure that there is a little bit of oversight over how we bring in our clients. Let's make sure that there is more due diligence that is done on the clients that we actually bring on board. And so I really think that is how we actually tighten the environment to make sure that South Africa never finds itself where it was during the state capture project.
Lovely. So as we bring it to a close, Dr. Rexley Barnyard, is it Barnyard? Barnyard, that's right, says we really also need to invest in arts in our education system. And of course, it's wonderful to talk about science and technology, but we mustn't forget the arts. I think linking to this point about ethics and leadership, there's a point there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's interesting. When I grew up, and I'm sure this would be the same for you, Morris, we had a clubhouse where we didn't loiter the streets after school. We had a clubhouse, whether, near Jiva or you being taught drums or gumboot, whatever.
So just to let you know, you keep asking. So I grew up in Orlando West.
Yes, right.
And I did gumboots dancing, and I did ballroom dancing. I wasn't big enough to compete for gumboots dancing, but I was small enough, despite how big I look now, to actually win some tournaments in ballroom dancing. So yes, I know what you mean.
Right, we had those activities which actually kept our kids off the streets. We don't have that now. But I remember, as much as our schools, I matriculated in Orlando East in Lufenza Girls High, by the way. So as much as we were not well-resourced schools, but there would be those cultural and sporting activities that you would actually do, as a school. I don't know if schools today have that, to say on Wednesday, we didn't call it PE, but on Wednesday, you are running. Didn't matter whether you can run or not, you have to do something. You're playing soccer, you're playing netball, so as much as the options were limited, but we did something. So I think over time, that culture, of inculcating. My brother is a professional dancer today because we used to go to this dancing, clubhouse, and he took to it. I had 2 left feet, so I didn't. But right, so I think that is actually. Yeah, those who can't.
You did accounting instead.
Did accounting instead. But I think really it really, and I absolutely agree. So there are benefits, from that perspective, just in terms of how we deal with some of the social ills that we have, as a country today. So I think there is a lot of value, truth that is coming out from that.
So Ravi wants to ask a more personal question, and he's saying you are a CEO in male-dominated boards. You are CEO of an organization representing 80% of the JSE, and he just wants to know, how seriously are these male-dominated boards taking their social responsibility to gender diversity, to environment, social and governance issues, as far as you are concerned?
The reason, and you know this all too well, Maurice, leading a business school, the reason why we advocate and we talk about the importance of having diverse boards is precisely because the diversity that you have in a board enables the board to have a much more richer conversation, because all of us bring different elements that probably maybe as a woman, there would be issues that I would strongly put on the agenda that probably, not that you don't care for them, but would not necessarily occur, for you. So I really think that the onus, therefore, becomes on, I can't sit and say those boards are not taking these things seriously. I have a seat at the table. What am I doing about it? I might be a minority voice, but it gets important, that you actually continuously raise these issues, because I really think that there is a shift in the environment. There is a shift in conversation. There is a shift once you have diversity, once you have a woman when you didn't have a woman there, you know, once you have black people when you didn't have black people there, once you have disabled people in the room when you didn't have, you know, or differently abled people when you didn't have them there, because then they bring the richness to the conversation or certain elements to the conversation that were not there before, you know. So I really think that the onus is really on us, because we take these positions not as a woman but as a leader, you know, and I have a responsibility, especially I think when I look at myself as a black African woman in particular, you know, whether I like it or not, whether I realize it or not, whether I'm aware of it or not, I've got a huge role model effect. Because the majority of the citizens of this country look like me. You know, and when someone like me ascends to this position, they look at it and they say, maybe, just maybe, when we have people like her in these, so maybe our issues, you know, will start getting attention. You know, so I think that is what leadership is about. You know, it's really about ensuring that there is a fair spotlight and attention that we give to all of these issues that would not have necessarily been deemed important by the organization before.
So my final two questions. Do you think you speak truth to power? And if so, is power listening?
Yes, I think I do speak truth to power. Power is partially listening.
Let me end with the words of Oscar Mtimkulu, who says, "You are a very courageous leader. We need more of you in our country." Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Busisiwe. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evening.